Chapter 15 Refuge. Midday the next morning, the boat arrived at Nima's village. 50 or so beehive-shaped houses with thatched roofs lined the shore, interspersed with palm leaves, with enormous fan-shaped leaves and dangling coconuts. The tiny boat was greeted by dozens of youths who swam out and towed it swiftly to shore, dragging it onto the golden sand. Their muscles were strong from swimming, and they wore only simple cotton loincloths. A stretcher of palm leaves was hurried down to the boat. It took 4 strong men to bear Shamari up from the beach to the house of the healer, Marawa. The people of the village were loyal to Halima's family, and they called out welcome, singing her name in praise. As Halima hurried beside the stretcher, the people of the village ran alongside her, the women throwing flowers at her. They were beautiful people, small and lithe, with joyful voices as clear as tinkling bells. The women of the tiny fishing village wore their hair in tall, intricate, spiked braids, decorated with shells and beads, and went naked except for a garment of 3 broad leaves that covered their loins. They wore simple jewelry, fashioned from cowrie shells, coral, and pearls. The stretcher bearing Shamari was rushed into a rectangular house made of bamboo, which stood on stumpy stilts. A herd of tall-legged crabs scuttled underneath it. Halima attempted to follow, but as she ducked to enter the low doorway, a stocky woman, the breadth of a hippo, with a heavy, furrowed brow emerged, blocking her way. Unlike the other women, Marawa wore a long skirt and a headdress full of ostrich and vulture feathers. She held back Halima with one fleshy hand. "We will heal your husband," Marawa said curtly, and ducked back into the house, pulling the curtain after. Madango and Shinwa, father of Nima, each took one of Halima's arms and restrained her. "Trust them, Highness," Madango said gently. "They may not have all the titles of the court physicians, but I've seen the doctors of this village cut a tumor from a boy's brain and open a woman to deliver her child. I've seen them use their herbs to cure madness and to stop contagion. He is in good hands." Reluctantly, Halima nodded. "Come, let me take you to my house. You need food and rest," Madango said. As soon as Nima saw Halima approaching on the beach, she ran out of her house and down the shore, squealing like a young girl. She leapt into the arms of her mistress, nearly bowling her over. The two embraced and kissed and clutched each other joyfully. Nima was dressed like the other women of the village, her bottom bare, although she wore much more jewelry, including all the fine gold pieces Halima had given her. Halima pushed away her handmaiden and looked at her in astonishment. As they hugged, their bellies met, and Halima noticed Nima's full tummy and swollen breasts. Nima proudly ran her hand over her protruding belly. "My husband Madango has made me fat with a baby," she announced. Halima smiled and ran her hand over her own abdomen. Nima brightened even more. "You also!" she exclaimed. She laughed, still the bright, gay laughter of a child. Halima chuckled too. For the first time in months, it seemed. Madango came up behind Nima and gave her a playful spank. "Woman, save your gossip for the marketplace. The princess is ready to drop from hunger, and so are we. Or have you forgotten your husband and your father?" Nima embraced Madango and then wiry old Chinua. As she hugged her father, Madango gave Halima a quick glance, tinted with embarrassment. So he and Nima were married now. For an awkward, peculiar moment, Halima felt a pang of the old jealousy returning, but just as quickly it subsided, for she had her own husband now, whom she dearly loved. The princess raised an eyebrow. "So, you married my maidservant without my permission, eh?" she said with mock severity. Madango and Nima bowed their heads. "Then I give you my permission now, Nima and Madango," she said with a smile, "and I offer my blessings." The couple gave a deep sigh of relief. M'Dongo's house was a simple bamboo structure. Swallows had built their nests in the thatched roofs, and little green lizards scurried along the walls. Fishing tackle and tools hung neatly from pegs inside. All kneeling cross-legged on the floor, Halima and her hosts ate the soft, gluey flesh of stewed crawfish and sipped yuki, a drink prepared from sugarcane. Along the way, they could hear the beat of the drum and the sound of the wumbi, the 8-stringed harp the healers played as they worked and sang over Shamari. After supper, Nima's father bade them good evening. Nima and M'Dongo waited up with Halima late into the night, praying with her for Shamari's recovery. But at last, her hosts began to yawn and apologize deeply. The couple lay down, curled together on a bed of palm leaves, and soon they were snoring. Halima stayed sitting bolt upright, listening to the weird, inhuman cries and throbbing drum. Bizarre visions passed through her mind as she drifted back and forth from the realm of the waking to the realm of sleep. In her mind's eye, she saw her husband naked, stretched out on a mat, strange spirals and other markings painted over the length of his elongated frame. The healers swayed over him, chanting and praying for the intercession of the spirits. Yet again, she saw for a moment Shamari standing before her in the shadows, waving to her sadly. In her dreams, Shamari was again making love to her. She remembered his bull-like strength and savage passion. His words came back to her, the words he had said when he went off to war. "Do you think I would leave one such as you? I will always come back to you, Halima." The door to the bamboo hut swung open, and bright orange light streamed across Halima's face. She sat up, blinking, unable to believe it was already morning. The healer, Marawa, loomed over her. "Come," she commanded. Halima scrambled to her feet. "Follow me, princess," Marawa said. The beefy woman turned and strode off down the beach. Halima scurried after her, fixing her long skirts about her. "In all of nature, no beast is as cruel as man," the healer said angrily. "No animal would have ravaged a body as those butchers did. The torture would have killed an ordinary man, but he has the strength of a lion." "Then my husband lives." "When they poisoned him, they did not consider his great size. They did not give him enough poison to destroy him." Joy filling her heart, Halima rushed to the curtained entrance to the healer's house, but Marawa blocked her way and held the curtain shut with one broad hand, her dark eyebrows knitting together. Halima frowned. "What is it you're not telling me?" The medicine woman said nothing and pulled the curtain aside. Halima tore herself from the woman's gaze and ducked into the house. The air was thick with incense. Jars of goat's blood and other medicines sat on a table. Shamari was stretched out on a bed of palm leaves. As in her vision, he was painted with strange markings, crosses and spirals. Halima rushed to him and knelt beside him. He wore a faint smile and raised his right hand weakly to stroke her hair. She felt a warm rush of tears on her cheeks. "Oh, husband, I was so afraid," she murmured. She buried her head on Shamari's chest, where his wounds had been finely stitched. His heartbeat was powerful now, like a lion's. His chest rumbled as he told her, in his deep, gentle voice, "All the torment I endured was a fair price for this one sweet moment." He ran his long fingers tenderly across her tear-soaked cheek. "The only cruelty is not to see your beauty." Halima slowly raised her face from Shamari's chest and saw that her husband's eyes were fixed on infinity. "Oh, no," Halima moaned. She covered her face and began to bawl. "Do not weep for me," Shamari told her. "We of the Abaka have a third eye, an inner eye. Through it we see the whole world, not just shape and color, but order and meaning. My third eye is open now, Halima, and I see so much more now than I ever could before." I see what a fool I was to send you away. Your place is beside me, always. He drew Halima toward him, and they embraced. She bathed him in hot tears, and they nestled together for a few blissful moments. Halima lay on his chest as it rose and fell, listening to the squawking seagulls. She sat up again. Husband, now I must tell you something that will make you send me from your side again. She felt her courage ebbing. She could not say it. I am so ashamed. My yearning was so strong. I sacrificed everything to have you again. To save you, I sacrificed my flesh to Alagbadi. And to save you, I told him of the mountain pass to your kingdom. Your seer spoke truly. For love of you, I did betray your people. Shamari threw back his head and groaned. An awful roar like a lion thrust through with a spear. Shockwaves of anger and pain erupted from the giant. Halima bowed and began to pull away. Their lives together were at an end, she realized. It was folly to imagine otherwise. At least now she knew he was safe and alive, and at least they had had one precious, untroubled moment. But Shamari still clung to her with an iron grip that could not be broken. He lay shaking, trying to compose himself. The wrongdoing was mine, my wife. The old ones say, when the leopard is away, the cubs are eaten. Halima tried to ease his pain. I sent word to the Abaka. I told them to prepare themselves and told them to mount an ambush at the pass. Shamari shook his head. They will not believe an outsider. I left my younger brother, Jamuku, to rule in my stead. He is strong and valiant, but he does not have the shrewdness to discern that the warning is true. He half sat up. I must go to them, he muttered. As he rose, a spasm shot through him, and he fell back, coughing and spitting up blood. Halima pushed him gently down. No, rest, my love. Shamari nodded. He reached up, took her head, and brought it down so it again rested gently on his chest. On the beach, Halima knelt in the burning sand. She was dressed like the other women of the village now, wearing 3 broad leaves, strategically placed to shield her loins, a tiny string around her waist holding them on. Nima squatted behind her, fixing her hair into the spiked braids the women of the village wore. Now we will truly look like sisters, she said with a bright smile. Halima gazed out silently over the still ocean as Nima chattered on. The men will be back from the sea soon. They are emptying their wicker traps of all the lobsters and filling their nets with fish. She added proudly, Madango is fast learning to be a fisherman. The men all admire him. With his strong arms, he can drag up a whole net almost by himself. For 6 months, Madango had gone out to sea with the other men and had given Nima's parents 3/4 of his share of the catch. For among these people, it was the custom that when a man had no material possessions to give as a bride price, he must pay instead with the sweat of his brow. Halima looked at the gulls, which cried out as if in grief as they sailed through the hazy sky. I miss braiding this beautiful hair on the velvet cushions of your father's palace, Nima said, running her hands through Halima's locks. But we can have a good new life here. When your husband is strong again, he will learn to fish and sail as Madango has. Halima shook her head. We cannot stay here, Nima. There will be men of Alagbadi's searching for us, warriors of the people of the snake. But, Princess, we are one of hundreds of villages along the coast. They will never find us here. Nima suddenly pointed into the distance cheerfully. Look, Princess, the men are returning. She still has in her all the joy of a young girl, Halima thought as she stood, squinting out across the bright blue water. Far in the distance, she could make out 2 long boats pulling for shore. Nima prattled on. Tonight I will show you how we fry shark meat. You'll not believe what a good cook I have become. Halima stood up next to her, stiffening with fear. Nima ceased her idle chatter, sensing something was wrong. Halima felt her heart begin to race. She reached down and jerked Nima to her feet, pointing to the boats approaching. Hoisted above the sails fluttered a banner depicting a pair of snakes intertwined. It was the flag of the people of the Snake. From all around the village there came up cries of alarm. Women began to cry for their children, rounding up the naked toddlers who waddled innocently on the beach. Nima grabbed Halima's arm. "Princess, we must run to the bushes." They ran a few yards like chickens with their heads cut off, kicking up sand in all directions, and then Halima halted. Nima pulled at her hand frantically, but Halima shook her off. "I must see to my husband," she declared. Nima looked at her wide-eyed, quaking in terror. Halima remembered how her servant had been brutally attacked by the squat deserter in the forest and nearly violated. She could not ask her to linger by her side. Halima told her friend, "You do not have to stay." She pulled off the turtle-shell pendant, the symbol of her clan, and handed it to the other young woman. "Keep this with you. Run and hide yourself now, little sister," she ordered. Nima hesitated, then gave her a grateful look and dashed off into the grass. Halima turned and ran toward the sick house. When she was a few yards from the house, Marawa the healer caught her by the wrist. "It is too late," she hissed, and gestured to the shore, where the enemy boats had arrived. Moving with speed and discipline, 24 jet-black warriors poured out of the boats, a pair of long, narrow dhows, hollowed-out tree trunks. The men dragged the boats to the beach. They wore the war dress of the people of the Snake, with bands of reptile skin around their bulging biceps and thighs. They jogged up the beach in tight formation, carrying their spears upright. Like Nima, most of the young nubile women had run off into the tall grass. At Marawa's signal, the older women and children of the village clustered nervously around Halima, butting her with their bodies until she was hidden at the center of the crowd. Halima felt a crush of fragrant female flesh jamming around her, and could barely see over the shoulders of those shielding her. The head of the war party, a barrel-chested young man with a soldierly swagger and peach fuzz on his chin, approached the group. The women chattered anxiously among themselves. The boat captain raised a hand, silencing them for the moment. "Who speaks for the women of this village?" he called out. Marawa the healer pushed her way to the front of the crowd. "I do," she said, crossing her plump arms in front of her. The warrior turned to her, but spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "We are here on the business of Aligbadi the Trustworthy, great king of Kali. You who are his loyal subjects have nothing to fear." A few skeptical grunts erupted from the crowd. "Princess Halima, wife of the king, has been kidnapped by Abaka spies. We have been sent to rescue her." Marawa replied, "We have had no strangers visit this village in many months." There were murmurs of agreement among the women. Now the boat captain shouted out, "Know that by order of the king, those who harbor these fugitives face death." Marawa faced the youthful warrior eye to eye. She told him with contempt, "In the days of King Babatunde the Good, young men were not sent out to bully women." Some of the women laughed, and others cheered Marawa's boldness. "Cowardly boys!" a voice in the back hollered. Some of the old women bent and came up with fistfuls of sand and hurled them in the faces of the warriors. The young men staggered back in surprise and embarrassment. For a moment the boat captain looked as befuddled as his men. Then he snapped into action. "You men guard these women," he cried, waving to one boatload of men. "You others, search every house and all the woods." Warriors who'd piled out of the second boat ran up the beach, dispersing in all directions. Growling and trying to look as menacing as possible, the remaining young warriors surrounded the women on the beach, poking their fleshy sides tentatively with the points of their spears, as if they were some unfamiliar and possibly dangerous animals. The herd of women drew back into a tight pack, yelling back slurs upon the warriors' manhood. From behind, Halima felt a hand take her head and push her down so that she knelt in the sand, well hidden among the bare legs and feet of the older women of the village. In a few moments the other warriors returned, dragging behind the nubile young women and adolescent girls who'd taken refuge in the jungle. The boat captain sternly examined the features of each of the squirming maidens. He must have been given a description of me, Halima thought. Nima was among the fresh set of prisoners. Squinting, Halima could see that she had hidden the turtle pendant before she was snatched. Good thinking, Nima, Halima thought. For if that pendant had been found, the warriors would not rest until they found her. Meanwhile, the rest of the warriors returned from the houses. Some carried pots on their heads, others bowls full of cowrie shells, cola nuts, and jewelry. Now the women of the village howled in rage, some making as if to lunge past the spears of the men guarding them and attack the looters. The boat captain sighed. It was evident that this whole exercise was going less smoothly than he had planned. "We are not pirates," he snapped at his men. "Leave the fishwives a property." He spotted the leader of the second boat and demanded, "Have you searched every house?" His lieutenant, a tall, skinny youth no more than 17, nodded. "All except that one," he said, pointing to the healer's house. Crouched in the sand, Halima grabbed the thick ankles of the woman in front of her, so hard her fingernails bit into the unlucky woman's flesh. The healer spoke up. "That is a holy place to us, our place of healing. No outsiders are allowed there." The captain snapped his fingers and pointed to his skinny second-in-command. The lieutenant and 2 others started toward the rectangular house. Marawa shrugged. "There's only one sufferer there now, an old leper." The warriors stopped in mid-stride and looked at the boat captain. One man with exceptionally broad nostrils sniffed the air apprehensively. From the healer's house wafted the distinctive scent of rot. Halima could not imagine what potion Marawa had concocted on such short notice, but it truly had the stink of pestilence-ridden flesh. The boat captain rolled his eyes. "Go on. She may be lying." Marawa told him, "Yes, it should be safer now. We have almost cured him. The ointments we have given him will soon help his nose and fingers and feet to grow back, if it is the will of the spirits of the sea." The warriors turned back fearfully toward the boat captain, who ran his hand over his jaw indecisively. Halima began to tremble. In her mind's eye, she saw the men charging through the door of the healer's house and burying their spears into her helpless husband's chest. The boat captain declared, "Men, there's been no such contagion on the coast in a generation. If you're all so frightened by this old fishwife, I myself—" Suddenly, Nima gave one of the other young women who were lined up beside her a rude shove. "Stop pushing me," she barked. The other girl looked at her in confusion for a moment. Then she understood and charged Nima, tackling her and bringing her down to the ground. "Bitch!" the other woman screamed. "I know you've been lying with my husband, you adulteress!" They grappled on the ground, first one on top and then the other. The tension among the warriors of the people of the snake broke instantly. They watched guffawing as the 2 bare-bottomed girls wrestled, legs entwined, on the burning yellow sand, pummeling one another and tearing at each other's braids. The exasperated leader of the war party shouted an order, and the warriors, with considerable effort, pried the 2 clawing she-devils apart. One brawny warrior with a ring through his ear held each of them by the nape of the neck, an arm's length apart. They continued to reach for one another, sharp fingernails outstretched, still snarling curses. "If this is how their women fight, I don't want to wait here for the men to come," he told the boat captain. He nodded toward the sea, where a dozen tiny sails appeared on the horizon. The young captain threw up his hands in frustration. "Let's go." He ordered his men back to the boats. As the strong young men marched down to the boats, all the women, young and old, jeered at them. They bent again for fistfuls of sand and pebbles and hurled them after the men. The boat captain turned to the crowd beseechingly. "We are returning to Calais to join the great army of King Alagbadi, which is readying to march. Many of these brave young warriors will fall in battle before our enemies, the Abaka. You should honor them." Marawa sucked her teeth so loudly the dead could hear it. Others followed suit, and one tough old bird squeezed out a wheezing fart in contempt. The boat captain strode off a few paces, then turned back to remind them, "The fugitives may come to you. I warn you, give them no shelter, or others will come and burn your plague-infested village to the ground." As soon as the warriors climbed into the longboats and pushed off, Halima ran to her friend Nima and helped her from the ground where the warrior had flung her. She slapped the wet sand off the girl's backside. "May the Great One in the sky punish me for ever calling you a fool, Nima. Today you saved my husband's life." Nima smiled proudly as the two young women embraced. Behind them, the women and children stood at the water's edge, watching the longboats disappear into the distance. One young girl of about 8 began to sing a prayer for the men going into battle. One by one, the women of the village took up the song. Halima sighed and thought, "Foolish young men, with all your pride and anger, killing each other, making widows, when will you lay down your spears forever?" Fed goat's blood and other medicines, Shamari grew stronger and more vital each day, as if willing himself quickly back to health. Halima was permitted to spend more time with him now. She sang to her husband and fed him, changing the linen bandages on his myriad wounds from time to time. He listened with a smile to Halima's voice, but she knew he was tormented. For as he lay there, the army of King Alagbadi prepared to march on his people, the noble giants of the Silver Mountain. On the 5th day of their stay, Halima squatted outside Nima's house, churning butter by briskly shaking a calabash, while beside her, her friend cleaned and gutted a basket of freshly caught fish. She looked up to see a boy child of about 5 years old come running. "Come, come!" he cried urgently, grabbing Halima's arm and pulling her with all his strength. "Madango says you must come now." The two girls scrambled to their feet and chased after the scampering youth, down the beach to the healer's house. Halima gasped in amazement. Her husband Shamari stood outside the house, a spear in hand, swaying slightly but standing on his own feet. Chest thrust out and dressed in a fisherman's loincloth, he cut a proud figure, towering more than a foot above the murmuring fishermen and their wives who stood about him, gawking. Halima rushed over to him. "Husband, husband," she pleaded, "lie back down." "I must go." Madango stood next to her, echoing her appeal. "You are too ill, great warrior," he cried. "What use will you be to your people dead?" Nima implored, standing beside her mate. Halima went to him. "Husband, your eyes, your soldiering days are done." Shamari shook his head. "I have told you. We of the Abaka have an inner eye, and with it we can look deeper than any sighted man." In a firm but respectful tone, Madango told him, "Lord, philosophy will not help you against the slings and arrows of the people of the snake." Shamari stepped back and in a powerful voice challenged, "Who among you has the strongest arm?" "No, husband," Halima cried. "No foolish games. I forbid it." "I say, who among you has the strongest arm?" the king of the Abaka demanded. After a few trembling hands pointed him out, Madango quietly replied, "I, Lord. I alone here am trained as a warrior." Up until now, Shamari had been using the spear to prop himself up, but now he forced the weapon into the hands of the other warrior. "Go back 10 paces and hurl it with all your strength." Madango shook his head vigorously. "I am no murderer." Shamari grabbed Halima's arm. "If you truly love me, let me prove I am still a man." Halima looked into his eyes, at once vacant and full of eerie power. She knew that if she did not grant his wish, his love for her would slowly rot away, and in a few years, or perhaps many, ferment wholly into hate. Grimly, she nodded to Madango. The broad-shouldered warrior frowned in distress. Then he bowed obediently, and wearing a look of profound reluctance, backed slowly up. The crowd watched transfixed, some silently mouthing the number of each step as he retreated. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, finished M'Dango when he was in place. Wearing a pained look, he set his eyes on the blinded warrior king. A solemn hush fell over the crowd. It seemed that even the seagulls, hovering above, ceased their constant cawing. All that remained was the sound of the eternal ebb and flow of the surf. M'Dango planted his feet apart and crouched slightly, poised to throw. Nima, crying, buried her face in Halima's shoulder. Shamari bellowed, "Your best shot, warrior." Halima gripped Nima's hand as M'Dango wet his lips, then hurled the spear. Halima's heart rose to her throat as the spear swooped through the air like a bird of prey at its target. The weapon zipped past Shamari's ear and crashed into the outer wall of the healer's house behind him, wedging between the tall stalks of bamboo. Her husband didn't flinch. He must not have even known it was thrown, Halima thought. The crowd let out a collective sigh of relief. But Shamari was not pleased. He turned angrily and ripped the spear out of the wall. He cast the weapon back at M'Dango, and it landed barely a foot before him, kicking up a spray of sand. "No," Shamari demanded. "Not like a girl. I said your best throw, warrior. At my heart." Halima knew now that before M'Dango had aimed to miss, but he could not play that trick a second time. He looked at her beseechingly. Halima, feeling faint, whispered to the sword-bearer of her father, "You are forgiven." M'Dango nodded gloomily. He took careful aim, then leaned back with all his strength and pitched the spear silently at the heart of Shamari. The iron dart spiraled through the air with merciless certainty at Shamari's chest. Her husband stood still as a rock. "Oh no, he wants to die," Halima thought. She fell to her knees, gasping, as women of the village let loose a chorus of high-pitched squeals of horror. At the very last instant, Shamari stepped from the path of the spear, and with one long-fingered hand snatched it right out of the air. He did this in one fluid movement, so graceful it seemed easy, like a trick practiced for years by a juggler in her father's court. Shamari hoisted the weapon high above his head, waving it triumphantly in the air, while he let out a wild whoop of a warrior and jumped up and down, making the earth shake. The crowd roared in astonishment, and then converged on Shamari with cries of praise. "Hundreds of years from now, the people of this village will sing of this day," said Shinwa. Halima threw her arms around her husband, kissing his bare, heaving chest and shutting her eyes in relief. He looked down at her and growled, "Now, wife, do I have your leave to return to the Silver Mountain, or must I give your friend one more throw at me?" Halima beamed, swept with pride in him. "Where you go, I will follow," she whispered, happy tears rolling down her cheeks.